Okay, so welcome to Dreams of the High Frontier. I run the TR Long 36 channel on YouTube. If you're watching this from theforce.net, I post there as Chancellor Ewok. If you're watching this from alternatehistory.com, you probably know me as Mike Stearns. And this is my first podcast. I've never done a podcast before, so I hope you'll bear with me if this sounds a little bit rough. But what I'll be doing over the foreseeable future is I will be sharing with you the novel that I am writing, which is called, funnily enough, Dreams of the High Frontier, The Seven. The story of the Seven is the story of the Mercury astronauts and the beginning of the space age. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Prologue. 1000 AD, the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. The drums pounded loudly. The temple priest, resplendent in his jaguar-skin robes and jade adornments, swayed back and forth in time to the pounding rhythm. In front of him, in a stupor, lay the sacrificial victim. In the priest's hand was a knife. Its handle was made of bone, and the blade was obsidian. It was night-time. The wicked-looking obsidian blade caught the light of the torches and seemed to throw shards of fire everywhere. In the sky, the moon was blood-red. The lunar eclipse was nearing its climax. At the foot of the temple lay the bodies of the night's previous sacrificial victims, more than a dozen in all. The ritual would continue until the demon gods of the underworld spat the moon back out. The temple priest chanted softly, offering his prayers and the souls of the victims as the necessary sacrifice for the sky gods, in their endless battle with the demon gods of the underworld for control of the life-giving rain. Below the temple, in the main square, the roar of the crowd grew louder. It seemed to be competing with the pounding of the drums. All at once, the beating of the drums stopped, and the temple priest brought the knife down into the chest of the victim with all his strength. There was a loud crunch as the obsidian blade broke through the sternum. The body of the victim jerked once, then lay still. The temple priest reached into the victim's chest and pulled out his still-beating heart. The temple priest held up the still-beating heart for the crowd to see. The multitude gathered at the base of the temple bellowed its approval. 2 temple acolytes came forward and picked up the body of the victim by the arms and legs. Carrying the victim, they walked to the edge of the steep stone staircase that led up to the sacrificial altar from the plaza below, and threw the body down the steps. In the sky overhead, the moon began to lose its crimson hue. The sky gods had won their battle. The rains would come again. Neither the temple priest, or the acolytes, or the crowd below really understood what the lunar eclipse was all about, nor how or why it happened. They only understood that the sky gods resided in the stars, and that the stars ruled their lives and shaped their destiny, as the stars would shape the destiny of the whole human race. Chapter 1. October 4th, 1957, Baikonur Cosmodrome, Kazakhstan, USSR, 10:20 p.m. Sergei Korolev stood smoking a cigarette in the blockhouse at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The blockhouse was a beehive of activity as the launch controllers went through their final checks before launch, which was just 5 minutes away. Sergei Korolev had traveled a long and winding road to this point in his life, including spending time in a Russian gulag. He had been released after he had promised to reform and join the Russian Communist Party. Since that time, his work in rocketry and his organizational skills had caught the attention of the senior Soviet leadership, and he had been put in charge of the Soviet space program. Now, after 3 years of hard work, he was here at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, about to launch the first man-made satellite into outer space. Korolev's thoughts were interrupted by Deputy Flight Controller Colonel Anatoly Vasilov. "We are ready to proceed with the final checks, Comrade Chief Designer." Korolev put out his cigarette. "Thank you, Comrade Colonel. Let's go around the room one more time." Korolev pushed a button on his console. "Attention all flight controllers. Stand by for clear, no clear to launch. Booster is clear. Electrical is clear. Guidance is clear. Flight dynamics is clear. Flight activities officer is clear. Telemetry is clear. Retro is clear. Range is clear. Meteorological is clear. All controllers, this is launch. Rocket is clear." Korolev inserted a large titanium key into a slot in the middle of his console, proceeding with final countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Korolev turned the key. Go! On the launch pad, Flames blossomed beneath the engine bells of the R-7 semi-Orca rocket. For a brief moment, the rocket seemed to stand still while the fuel pumps throttled up to full power. Then, at T+3 seconds, the ground computers sent a signal to the lockdown clamps holding the rocket to the pad, and the rocket roared like a freight train into the night sky. "Pad is clear. Confirmed," said Korolev. "Rocket is 50 kilometers downrange. Altitude is 50 kilometers and increasing," said the guidance officer. "Confirmed. Now approaching max drag," called out the telemetry officer. "Confirmed." 50 kilometers overhead, the rocket was buffeted as it soared through the upper edges of the atmosphere. Trajectory is stable, right down the middle of the range." "Confirmed," said Korolev again. "Engine shut down in 1 minute," called out the booster officer. "Confirmed." 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engines off. High overhead, the R-7's engines shut themselves off, and the rocket glided smoothly through the silent vacuum of space. A few seconds later, 4 pyrotechnic bolts fired, and the nose cone was ejected. A few seconds after that, a spring was triggered, and a small satellite floated free. It was round, metallic, and silver-colored. It wasn't very big, only about the size of a basketball, with 4 slender antennas trailing behind it. As soon as it separated from the spent rocket, an internal radio began to transmit a steady beep, beep, beep. On the ground, Engineer Lieutenant Vasily Borisov was carefully tuning a radio, searching for the satellite's radio transmission. "Do you hear it?" asked Korolev slightly impatiently. "1 moment, Comrade Chief Designer. I am attempting to acquire the signal now." One hand turned a knob on the large radio set in front of him, while the other hand rested lightly on his headphones. Suddenly the hand pressed very hard, and Borisov said excitedly, "Yes, I have it." He took off his headphones and flipped a switch. A steady beep, beep, beep could be heard. Then the room exploded in cheers. The White House, Washington, D.C., 5 p.m. President Eisenhower was conducting his weekly meeting with the Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, when Sherman Adams, the White House Chief of Staff, entered the Oval Office. The fact that Sherman had entered without knocking meant that it must be something important. "Can I help you with something, Sherman? Is something wrong?" "I'm sorry for disturbing you, Mr. President," said Adams, "but I thought you ought to see this right away." He took a piece of paper out of a folder and walked across the Oval Office to the President's desk. "The CIA intercepted this an hour ago. It's a transmission of a phone call that took place between the head of the Russian Missile Development Program and Premier Khrushchev. The chief designer is informing Khrushchev of the successful launch of an artificial satellite atop an R-7 rocket." Dulles uttered a shocked, "What? When did this happen?" "Approximately 10:30 p.m. Moscow time," responded Adams. "What else do we know?" asked Eisenhower. "Not much, unfortunately," answered Adams. "We're treating this as legitimate, because within 15 minutes of this phone call, Moscow began sending messages confirming the successful launch to all of its embassies." "Thank you, Sherman," said Eisenhower. "That will be all for now." Adams turned and walked out of the Oval Office. Eisenhower and Dulles exchanged looks. "I thought our intelligence said that it would be some time before the Russians would be able to attempt something like this," said Eisenhower. "That was my understanding as well," said Dulles. "So what does this mean?" asked Eisenhower. "It means that everything has changed," said Dulles. Okay, so this concludes the prologue and chapter 1 of Dreams of the High Frontier. I'm going to hopefully try to do this on a regular basis, but in the meantime, I encourage you to go to my blog and read the text of the book, and I also hope that you will subscribe, like, and comment, and thanks for listening.